some considerations on the question of technology, or this Frage nach their technique. The title in the first sentence somehow suggests something like Socrates' sense of the philosopher as a hunter in the forest, as seeking a quarry, and the truth being the quarry. Because it's Frage, this knock, it can be understood as sort of like being drawn towards or something. So I guess what bothered me about this talk that he gave in the Millerman talks, so-called, is the account of Hobbes. There's the unclarity. So and I think it's in Hobbes himself. So there's unclarity about when Hobbes says, I am no longer giving you a teaching that has a final cause in the, or summum bonum. Well, in fact, summum bonum is perfect, because that's clearer, because that's happening in our current laws. It's in question in our current law too. In this, but see, it's a qualified thing. It's the way, as Strauss would put it, there's a qualification. He's not saying, he doesn't say, I'm not giving you a summum bonum, or final cause. The cause is finalis. Rather, he says, I'm not giving you a summum bonum or final cause in the way that they did of old, or the way that tradition does. So he does give us a final cause, but then, yeah, that's interesting. Then we have this sort of in such proximity to the Heidegger's treatment of the Aristotelian. I say it aeatia. I don't know what the correct pronunciation is, but we have sort of this question of different ways to understand what's at stake in cause, whether cause involves this Denken, Donken, or Denken is thinking, Donken thinking, because Heidegger says like Donke, Dankeschön, thinks beautifully. So there's this Denken, Donken. Heidegger says thinking is close to thinking. Element in, according to Heidegger, in the Aristotelian way of thinking causalogy. And I think what it corresponds to is, so one, I would give the example of what Kristen Stewart says about acting. She says, you mean you're acting? Like that's sort of, like, in other words, you mean that you have some kind of technique, that you have a technique, and you have a technique, you have an acting technique, you have a training that gives you a technique. So I mean, for instance, there's a kind of technique that goes with the silent films, with this sort of where, yeah, you assume the picture is the main thing, the image, and then you see, certain gestures, such as, even though it wasn't a silent film, it was shot in the style of silent films, when Farley Granger sort of thrusts out his guilty hands that had strangled someone earlier in the, or at the beginning of the film Rope, into sort of horrified self-perception. And it's a sheer sort of like images come first, and then the voice, it's images with dialogue, not the other way around. And this is the way that Hitchcock understood his film technique as a silent film technician. As a technician of the silent film era, he moved over into film with dialogue. And yeah, so hinc ille lacrimae, from hence all these tears. We get the series of Hitchcock films and then the series of De Palma films. And I think that shows it more simply. Like, look at De Palma. It's like he doesn't so much, a couple of films he does in Hitchcock style, but most of his films aren't directly in Hitchcock style, but he uses Hitchcock's technical apparatus. But he himself is the technician. That's what we shouldn't forget in this sense of the when Heidegger is talking about the question that technology is putting to us in a way. He's saying, yeah, we're being drawn into this delicate difference between Hobbes' version of an end, where Hobbes says explicitly, no, it's a technique. He said the polis is a technique, but we're the technicians of it. What else is there besides the technique? There's something like what Aristotle calls a hexis. There's a hexis, and hexis is something that is very subtle in the way Aristotle tries to describe it, but it's basically, hexis is where the coordination of like the Trinity, as it were, happens. Hexis is where something happens to arte or virtue that couldn't happen from any other kind of knowledge, from any technological knowledge, because it comes from somehow giving a measured balance account to your ethical nature. So, in one sense, yeah, that's the tricky thing for Dawson. In one sense, yeah, there's a habit, and then so you would say probably like Kristen Stewart, as in being an actress, has picked up certain habits where certain things she can use as techniques. Like, there's a habit that one picks up, but then at the decisive moment, Aristotle says, no, it's not just a technique, it's something else. So I think there's something tricky already and that Strauss was struggling with also in Hobbes, because Hobbes he says this qualified statement, not giving you a telos in the sense that they did, but I'm giving you a different type. I'm giving you one that I'm calling technicians telos. I mean, that goes in practical terms. It goes with the legal profession and the so-called bureaucracy and the bureaucracy and the deep state and the how does Fukuyama also put it, the veto-ocracy and the situation of not getting the trains to run, not being able to get the trains to run on time, as the consensus society of the fascists was able to do, according to the sort of version that has the most sort of Vorauseilender how does that go? Vorauseilender Gehorsam. Well, in any case, this is a word that's meant to signal Gehorsam. I mean, that you must Gehorsam or hear somehow in advance in order to sort of prepare yourself to act in the way that the orders will then come. You have to already be prepared in advance to act in the right way. In this way, in that way, you could see like totalitarianism in sort of the strict way is a kind of technique of how to, according to this sort of edition, this isn't. I don't think Arendt used this concept that Timothy Snyder uses, this complying in advance concept of fascism, which now he's sort of thrusting over the Russians and say this is what they're up to. This Vorauseilender Gehorsam or whatever it's Gehorite or whatever it's called. Yeah, so I think right in the core of this kind of dispute over when. So I mean, on the whole, I just would say one little thing about Strauss there. I think Strauss is talking about there's a moment when in the profession, in the universities, you had to give excuses for talking about like classical philosophy, which is true in most of in Strauss's years, even in the University of Chicago, which is so good. It was one of the few universities that wasn't founded on the old basis, on the basis of forming pastors, as was Yale, for instance. But it was one of the only two universities that was founded straightforwardly on the I call it the Prussian model, but I don't know that's on the model of the German-speaking universities, let's say. Maybe for that reason, it went over faster to the newer version, so that Strauss actually got the worst of that by going to the University of Chicago, because it was exactly they who understood the new doctrine so well. But of course, at the end of his life, Strauss went to a couple universities where he lectured. I mean, he became professor at some universities that were, I think, Catholic, or in any case, they had some religious component to them, whereby they were more open to studying classical philosophy. And then Strauss was more welcomed in the department, I think. Then. I think partly the clear form of the question is, like, yes, of course, at a certain point, episteme or Wissenschaft or philosophy, all those three together, was replaced by science, where science taken as the physics where the main thing is force and pressure, where those are like the two sine qua non concepts. Neither force nor pressure requires anything, any other forms of causal understanding, except the quote-unquote instrumental kind, meaning rational instrumental kind, where let's just say some form of see, again, it's sort of unclear. It's sort of Hobbesian. It's like, what exactly does the rational utilitarianism or functional rationality or something like that? It never just comes by itself without sort of a profile of action, because the European Union generally comports itself and presents itself as acting very sort of calmly, like Merz and Mark Rutte and Ursula von der Leyen always present themselves as making very sort of staid, calm, rational choices, placating Trump. Merz totally placating Trump from a sort of de haut en bas sort of attitude of okay. I'm so grateful. Like he repeated that after because Zelensky had been finger wagged at by Vance, or double teamed by Vance and Trump, and then Mertz just went along with it. But I think it was partially it's this attitude of grandiose rationality in some way. So yes, I think all this questions are somewhat obscure. I think one could show, various versions. Of course, in physics, we could show here's the real case of the end of teleology fully. Although then we would want to say, I guess then you could still say, like in a Nietzschean way, but why are we even doing physics? Why science? But and maybe other questions. But in these other cases, I think it's a slide from where there's somebody, as Strauss says, presenting a teaching. So Strauss says Dewey was still presenting a teaching. And then there's like history of political science, or political science as... So, I mean, I think Strauss is saying this of the profession at a certain time started to demand the Wertfrei Wissenschaft version in the profession, and one version is his own life at the end of his life, or in his years. And I mean, he was in the New School for like 10 years. So, but then, and I think he had much more freedom. But then, during those years when he was in universities where he felt like they didn't like somebody who would present a teaching and say, this is what I believe, and this is what I want to create disciples that believe the same thing. I think maybe that's the clearest way to say it. There's either you take the approach, this man, the professor, is a sort of moral exemplar, and he's sort of in creating disciples, in teaching his teaching, he's teaching something that he is the representative of. Just as Hegel got paid by how many people came to his lectures for a similar reason. Like that's how they used to do it in Berlin in those days at the beginning of the 19th century. And then you get something where you get the Weber version, which is the so-called, Strauss called it the sanitized version of Nietzsche, which is still popular among American conservatives. I don't know, American conservatives, but it was the guy at the Hoover Institute, the Scottish guy. He touts this because though it was like, here's the sort of John Yoo version. Here's the if John Yoo is a specific type of conservative, the Hoover, the other guy, Stephen Kotkin, is a specific type of conservative, and wherever those two things overlap is Hoover Institute. And then can this be accepted by this type of tact would come into question. But I think this overall question raised by Heidegger is about is a kind of Socratic, or I guess it's the art, the dramatic art of Plato more, but in presenting the dialogue. But it has a kind of it presents itself in the same as a quarry is loose in the forest, as I was saying before, and as Heidegger sort of, by saying he's questioning, it's as though he would say, I step back and before somebody would come in several hundred years and advance this thing. But it's though he's saying that in the same way that Socrates says, "I know that I don't know," or that Socrates says, I'm too old to give birth." As Socrates says, "I'm just the midwife." So it's like Heidegger saying, we're only questioning. We're not even investigating in a certain way. It's not even a critique in a certain way. So rather, we're questioning. If we were critiquing the fundamental notion of technology, we would probably want to, we would have to have something we could stand up and say, here's the list of propositions, or the episteme, or the sort of thing like a mathematical equation, which then somebody can look at and see that we're doing it correctly, whereas the people presenting technology before this weren't doing it correctly. But where's the but I think what Heidegger is saying by the question is, we can't do things in the way we could still do things before the Spinoza's writer, the psychologism problem. Before there are two different things, but before the psychologism problem came in, where the question between logic, which has a priority, logic or psychology, which is at the foot of Husserl, came in. Heidegger saying, once we have this, and it sort of reveals to us that the methexis problem doesn't really work, then we can no longer sort of critique or do investigation in the way we thought we could, where we're trying to correct stuff. I love Plato, but I love the truth better, I think, is Aristotle's saying. But rather, we're at a situation where questioning is more appropriate, and this is an invitation to the radical questioning of technology. But again, we should remember our Dasein is here by way the idea of the technological essence. Our Dasein is also the technician of a particular way of things becoming intelligible.